Hey everyone, Lisel Crowley here at the Cool Tool Studio. In today's project, I'm going to show you how to make unique bails 4 different ways. These are the projects we're going to do. We're going to do a pendant using a jewelry artist element with a coil bail. I call this a flip bail. We're going to use another pendant using a different jewelry artist element in a leaf motif with a vine bail. I love this turtle. This is another jewelry artist element texture with a fold over bail that also has a lovely design on it. And finally, a tube bail that was pre-shaped and attached with a ball. To do these projects, we're going to need jewelry artist element textures. You can use any textures, but these work great for these projects. Thickness frames, big roller. I love this rolling pin. It's fantastic. The clay doesn't stick to it and it's a nice size for rolling out clay. The ultra clay pick, cool slip to lubricate your textures, a clay hydrator to keep your clay moist while you're working and also to store your clay, brush and water, and my favorite clay, Easy 960 Sterling clay. This is fantastic for bails because it gives you nice finish strength. Let's get started. Okay, so right now we're going to make the turtle pendant with the fold over bail. And I love these jewelry design templates. They have so many choices. And I fell in love with this little guy here, so this is the one we're going to use for this pendant. This has already been lubricated. Always make sure you lubricate well whenever you're going to texture your clay. I'm going to start by rolling out some clay 4 cards thick. Whenever you're texturing, you always want to roll your clay out thicker first, with the smooth and thicker first. And that will give you a perfect textured piece. I'm now going to lay my clay on top of the turtle. Put my 2 cards thick guide over it and roll with a firm, even pressure. And I'm going to release this on. I love this little guy. And I'm going to cut it out with this template. Now this template is a little long for this design. So what I'm going to do is cut it out and then trim off the top. It's really easy to do and it makes your templates more versatile. So I'm going to cut the entire shape out and remove my excess clay. And using one of these metal tools, I'm just going to curve it and come in and trim. And you do want to leave some white space at the top for the bail that we're going to attach, but I didn't want quite as much white space at the top. So this is ready to dry and sand. I'm now going to make the bail piece for this. And I'm going to use this lovely motif right here for the middle of my bail. And I'm also going to use this template for the bail. I'm going to use the dagger shape, I call it a dagger shape, or a pod shape. And this is a great design for, or a great shape for a fold over bail. And for a bail, I'm going to, again, because I'm texturing it, I'm going to go 4 cards thick at first. Take my pre-lubricated texture. There's so many lovely designs on these. And I'm going to roll with one firm, even swipe. Release it. And now I'm going to come in with my template. You want to just make sure that that motif is centered within the shape of the template, and cut this out. Remove the excess clay. And at this stage, I'm just going to fold this over. I'm not going to do anything else to it. I'm just going to fold it over so that it's already got a fold in it before it gets too dry. And then I'll set this aside to dry along with my pendant. Here you see my two pieces. I've got my turtle pendant. It's been sanded and refined. And I've got my bail that's also been sanded. And now I'm going to simply attach the bail to the pendant using some water. I like to moisten both the pendant and the bail. So first I'm going to moisten the front and the back of the pendant right where the bail is going to go. And then I'm going to get my brush right inside there and moisten the bail. I'm going to slip the bail over that, set it down, make sure it's centered and straight, and then press. And then I like to just really kind of flood it with water on the front and let that soak in. I'll put it in the dehydrator, flip it around after it's dried, and flood it with water on the back, and then it should be good to fire. So now we're going to do the frond pendant with the Viney Bail. So Cool Tools has a great line of textures called Jewelry Artist Elements, and they're individual motifs that work great for pendants. And this is the one I've selected for this particular project. And for the first step for this is to just roll out the texture. And I'm also going to do, as I do for most pieces, I'm going to roll it out 4 cards thick. I don't need a lot of clay for this. This is going to be kind of a petite pendant. Once I have it rolled out nice and smooth, I take my lubricated texture and I place my clay on top. And with the 2 card frame, I will roll with 1 firm, even swipe. Look how pretty that is. Look at how pretty that is. Now for this, I'm just going to freehand cut it. Because it's a very organic, leafy looking design, I want a very organic cut. And I'm using the Ultra Clay Pick, which cuts through the clay like butter. And I'll set that aside to dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to attach a vine bail to it, and I want my pendant to be dry, but I'm going to attach my bail wet so that I can shape the bail and have it fit the pendant nicely. So here I have the pendant. It's been dried and sanded, and it's ready to attach a bail. I want to work on a tough card because once I get that bail attached, I don't want to have to disturb it. I'm going to use some nice fresh clay or freshly reconstituted clay. You don't want to work with clay that's a little dry when you're making a vine bail. And I'm only pinching off about 1 or 2 grams of clay. You really don't need a lot. The more clay you have, the longer your coil will be, and the more design options you'll have with the bail. So I'm going to start the coil with my fingers and then come in with my coil roller. I have way more clay than I need, but I do like to have options. I'm just going to pinch some of that off. And you can see how little I need for a bail for a pendant this size. A little came off on the end, but that's not an issue because I have plenty of clay. I think I'll stop there. I like to have my coils for bails tapered very nicely. I think it gives it a nice organic look. Once you have it rolled out, The first thing you want to do is wet it. And then I will pick it up. Once it's wet, I don't like to handle it with my fingers because I don't want to get my clay all over my fingers. So at this point, I'm going to manipulate it with my brush. I'm not going to handle it with my fingers. And I'm going to put a little pressure on the fatter end of the coil. I'm also going to dampen the back of my piece. And I'm going to just press my piece onto the end of the coil. And I want to press enough to somewhat flatten that coil and also have it bond thoroughly, but I don't want to flatten it so much that I'm cutting through it. Now I'm going to bring the coil up and around and just let it gently. It's helpful to form it over a coffee stirrer or a toothpick or something to hold it up. And I just let that gently land kind of where it wants to go. And sometimes I'll come back in and I'll sort of fine tune it. So I'm going to just add a little curly cue to it. As long as I keep the coil moist, I can bend it and shape it without it drying and cracking. I like to just lightly brush over it with water, so if there's any tiny, tiny surface cracks, I can take care of them. And that's ready to go in the dehydrator, and after it's dried, I'll do a final sanding and we'll fire it. Now we're going to do a pendant that has what I call a flip bail. It's a little bail that I make with a tiny little coil. And this particular one is going to be textured on both sides. Instead of rolling out 4 cards thick, I'm going to roll out either 5 or 6 cards thick. This time I'll do 6. And I'm going to take some Easy 960 clay and roll it out. And now I'm going to place it on top of the texture tile, place the 2 cards thick frame, and then place the wallpaper upside down over the top. And I'm going to roll with 1 firm, even pass. And this will texture both the front and the back. You can see how nicely it's textured the back. And now you can see how beautiful it looks on the front. Place this on a texture on a tough card. And I love this template. There's a whole bunch of new templates that Cool Tools has with a variety of shapes. I happen to think that this shape goes really nicely with this design. So I'm going to place it over the design and make sure I have it centered nicely. And just cut it out using the clay pick. I like to go around twice to make sure I have it cut all the way. Remove the excess clay. Now this will simply go into the dehydrator to be dried. Once it's dried and sanded, I'll make the bail and attach it. I like to attach a wet bail to a dry piece because that way you don't distort the piece. Okay, so now I have that piece that has been dried and sanded, and you can see how nice it looks on the front and also on the back. This adds a nice decorative touch on the back to have it textured. And I'm going to make a very small coil of clay. I'm pinching off a very tiny piece of clay. And I start it with my fingers. I really have more than I need there. And I'm going to roll a nice thin coil. Coil roller is one of my favorite tools. Once it's rolled, I'm going to wet it with some water. And the reason that I do that is anytime you bend the clay, you run the risk of surface cracks if it's not nice and moist. Even though I started out with nice moist clay, the act of rolling it could have dried it out somewhat. So by wetting it first and letting that water soak in, it makes it nice and flexible, and I'm less likely to get surface cracks. I'm going to work with a small piece of coffee stirrer. You can use any little round cylinder that's straight. If it's tapered, you'll have an issue, but it has to be straight. Once the coil is wet, you don't want to handle it with your fingers. You want to handle it with the brush. And I'm going to drape it over the coffee stirrer and then just set it down. And this creates a little, what I call, again, a flip bail. You also want to have the size of the bail be relative to what you want to hang it on. If you want to hang it on a delicate chain, it doesn't need to be as big as if you want to hang it on a very hefty cord. And I just want to make sure it touches the piece nicely on the top. And then with these ends, I can do something decorative if I want. In this case, I'm just going to kind of follow the line of the shape. And as long as I wet it, because the pendant itself has been dried, I don't have to worry about compromising it by wetting it. I'm just wetting it to shape the coils, and then I'll come in with my clay pick and trim it off. And that will go in the dehydrator, and it will have a final sanding, and then it'll be fired. So now we're going to make a pendant that will have an attached tube bail. I'm using one of these Jewelry Artist Element. I'm going to, as with all of my pieces, I'm going to roll it out with 4 cards thick first. And this is another design that is good for the sterling, because when you're attaching a bail, you want it nice and strong. I've already lubed my texture. I'm going to lay my clay on top of the texture. Take my 2 cards thick frame and roll. Look at how pretty that is. I love it. I'm going to come in with one of the templates. This design would lend itself to many shapes, but I really like this pillow shape for it. Get it centered in there nicely. Always remember to anchor your template and your clay when you cut. Pull away the excess clay, set that aside to dry. Next, I'm going to make the tube. And I've decided to make a texture tube, and I'm going to use this lovely paisley texture tile. If you're going to make a textured bail, I do recommend using a low relief texture, because if you use too deep a texture, you run the risk of weakening the bail as you bend it. Rolling it out 4 cards thick again. And again, this has been lubed thoroughly. Let's go this way. So I just like to freehand cut a triangle. And I like to flip it over and very lightly moisten the back. I don't want to really saturate it, but I do want it lightly moistened. And I'm just going to form it over the tool. So I start by rolling it up on the wider end and just roll it around. And that gives you a nice tube that you can then attach to your piece once it's dried and sanded. So this will be set aside with the pendant to dry. I'll sand it and then I'll attach it to the pendant. So here are my pieces that have been sanded and dried, and I'm going to attach them together now. I also made a little ball of clay because I like to have a little bit of a spacer between the tube bail and the piece. So the first thing I'm going to do is moisten the edge where I want to attach the ball, and then I'll moisten the ball, get it centered, and just press it up against the pendant. Now, this kind of an attachment will need to be attached and dried and then reinforced a little bit after it's dry, but it doesn't take a long time to do that. The next step I'm going to do is to really moisten the bail and the ball and push that down. And I want to make sure that it's centered and straight. Those are important aspects. And then I won't do anything else. I'll just put it right in the dehydrator and let it dry. After it's dry, I'm going to reinforce it by adding some extra water on the front and on the back. And sometimes I'll even put a little dab of syringe on the back to make sure that I've got a really strong connection. But one of the things I love about the Easy 960 clay is that it does join together, bond together very well with water. Okay, so here's our bales 4 ways fresh out of the kiln. They've been black maxed and rubbed with the white Pro Polish pad, which I really love. And you can see how they look, front and back. They all came out fantastic, except that this one, the bale kind of flattened a little in the firing. And one of the things that's great about the Easy 960 is if this happens, it's strong enough that you can come in with a pair of pliers and fix it. So I'm using my handy dandy Lindstrom pliers, which I absolutely love. And I'm just going to bend that. And there it is, ready to go.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.